share. And Andy and I will have to work some real magic here to get through content of 90 minutes in 20.
Yep.
So where is play slideshow? Andy, why is this in a PowerPoint?
I don't know, because that's how I built it.
Mm-hmm. Am I stupid? Where is the play? I want to just play it. Slideshow.
F5 would do it.
Play start. Yay!
There we go.
Perfect. Biggest hurdle is taken. Magic can begin. Hi, I'm Doris Rusch. I'm a professor of game design at Uppsala University. Andy.
I'm Andy Phelps. I'm a professor at like everywhere. So we'll just we'll go with that. So
also with us as
Yep.
guest professor. I'm so happy. Okay, cool.
Yep.
We talk about the magic of the Witch's Way. And it begins. It's a text adventure game. It's a transformative text adventure game. And it begins like this. As first nights go, this wasn't the worst. You just woke up in Auntie's cottage and actually feel rested. You haven't gotten a good night's sleep in a while, and usually new places make you nervous. But the moment your ear touched a pillow in the small but friendly upstairs bedroom with the window overlooking the garden, you were out. It was like catching up on a year of sleepless nights. Everything around you exuded an air of calm order and protection. Your otherwise voracious thoughts found no fodder to chew on the moment you slipped between the cool, clean, white cotton linens. You noticed a faint scent of lavender. This should set the scene. This should set the atmosphere. This should set up the magic of what is in store with this game. And the magical forest behind the cottage where you find yourself. So you're taking the role of a character called Lou, and she is a middle-aged woman. Not many game characters are middle-aged women. And she's having some sort of midlife crisis. Also not something that we encounter very often, right, Andy? That was your input. And so she's taking a time out from her busy and successful but unfulfilled life to recover her creativity and to find alignment with herself and her true nature. And she's moving to this cottage in the woods, and she's discovering the secrets of the unknown forest. She's helped along by a quirky bookshelf that has magical clues, and you always pick the right book with just the right passage you need at the moment, and some animal guides, and they're cats, and they have the same name, quite not accidentally, as our cats, Ghost and Spuk. And it is all by a project that Andy and I have. The existential transformative game design framework. And we've published on this for a while now and tried to come up with a framework to help designers make games that contribute to a meaningful life by addressing the existential givens, death, purpose, freedom, and isolation. Here again, it comes up what is really important to our mission here is the idea of alignment, of authenticity, personal integrity. And James Bugental, who is an existential psychotherapist, he writes that viewed from an existential perspective, the good life is an authentic life, a life in which we are as fully in harmony as we can be. Inauthenticity is illness, is living in distorted relationship to our true being. So the million-dollar question, of course, is how do we live in harmony with ourselves? How do we embark on this path towards authenticity and integrity? And there is truly some magic involved in doing this, and magic that unfolds when this authenticity is established. And we have anchored this in the idea, and that's not something that we just came up with. We have anchored this in the idea that our self has a conscious part and an unconscious part. And Martha Beck, who is a life coach, actually speak of the social self that is kind of trapped in all of these cultural and social expectations, and the essential self, which is what you truly must do to be yourself, to feel in alignment, to feel a sense of inherent meaning and purpose, or to use the words of Joseph Campbell, bliss. This is what Campbell means when he's talking about the experience of bliss, of this deep sense of being present, of doing what you absolutely must do to be yourself. And so the Witch's Way is very much informed by different kinds of strategies that should help you get on this road to your own bliss, to figure out what is it that makes you tick. So it's on the one hand, it's a story, and on the other hand, it's also a guide, or meant to be a guide. So some things might be a little bit more outspoken if it were only a work of fiction, to become a template for the readers or players to think for themselves, explore and experiment for themselves, where their areas of stuckness are, where their false beliefs are, their limiting beliefs, and how they can create their own affirmations to live a life that feels more true to themselves. The way to connect the conscious and the unconscious self through the centuries has been myth, because myth as an art form, as an expressive, very, very human form of storytelling is imagery and symbolism. It speaks to our unconscious. Our unconscious understands the language of symbolism and imagery. It's not analytical in that sense. It responds to something that is born from the moment. And metaphor is really big in that as well, because it's imagery. So the Witch's Way is also informed very strongly by mythical ideas for which we try to mine our own unconscious. And we did a lot of dream work and conversations around dream imagery and conversations around the importance of magic and rituals in our lives. And he has the thing for druids, which you will have to talk about at some point.
Yep.
And I have the thing for witches. Do you want to say something about druids?
I'll talk about it when I talk about the dog.
Okay, great. So for me, the way into all of this, when I think of a character to open the world to these unknowns and where my authenticity is housed, is the archetype of the witch. And I've been really, really inspired. And I don't know why, but it has always really spoken to me. I've been a huge fan of Pippi Langstrumpf growing up. And now I live on the very island where all the TV series has been made. So I'm walking around in this exact environment. It's super crazy. And what is speaking to me about this is that the witch is the archetype of the successful deviant. The witch is different, but she survived this difference. And I didn't come up with this term of successful deviancy. I took this from Maya Deren, and I was actually pointed towards this by Tess Tannenbaum, who's an amazing scholar and also deals a lot with magic and games. So she's fantastic. And she said, yeah, you've got to read the notebooks of Maya Deren. And in these notebooks where she writes about witches and sorcerers that she is investigating in Bali, she writes, society, are afraid, for they think, if we cannot survive without our order, how can the witch survive in solitude? Hers must indeed be a very powerful order to exist so independently, without all the intercooperation and individual compromise which we have to go through to survive. So it's this unapologetic authenticity, being who you must be, and still making it in a world that constantly tries to tell you what you're supposed to do, not supposed to do, how you're supposed to behave or not. So the Witch's Way is about this magic inherent in the authentic life and in this kind of alignment. And one of the central images that Andy drew here is the thumb pump. Go ahead, you explain this. Can you please?
It's sort of it's a furnace that basically pulls magic from the forest and from the surrounding area and allows you to draw on it to perform magic, to cast spells and to know things, essentially. And what's interesting about it, of course, is that you inherit this thing from the previous occupant of the hut, where you've taken up residence. And it basically tells you, by the way, it's broken and it might explode right from the beginning. So there's this sort of give and take with the whole thing right from the beginning. And so I tried to give it a little bit of an edge within the illustration that sort of speaks a little bit to that wonder, but that anxiety at the same time.
Exactly. And the key to wrangling the power of the sound pump is actually to stand in your own power. So you have to grow, and Lou, the main character, has to grow as a person and really figure out what makes her tick in order to wield and channel this extraordinary power of this device in her basement. And it is the connectedness to the forest, as you just said, Andy, and the nature around it, drawing on this sense of oneness and connectedness to every living organism, the energy that every living organism has, that is the tricky thing to master. And it starts with her mastering herself, because there is not really a distinction between us as individuals and our energy field that we are connected with. So this taps into this very natural idea of magic. It's not flying on broomsticks, even though that would be so cool, but it's really not. It's really more that we are surrounded by all of these different intelligences, that we are surrounded by all of these different living organisms, and all of that is very, very natural. It's not supernatural, it's very, very natural, but tapping into that has a very strong magical component. So what structures this whole game and the approach to the mythical imagery and how we lead through the journey of Lou's transformation is in the first part that we released, Spring. It's structured in the four seasons. It's informed by 4 technologies of magic that I have derived from Martha Beck, and she has derived from other people. And they are oneness, wordlessness, imagination, and forming. Actually, it should be flipped. It's wordlessness first, and that's the key to tap into the sense of oneness. And from there, we can activate our imaginations. And by doing so and imagining how we want things to be, and I think Nick also mentioned this in his really lovely introduction to this conference, we can manifest what we want to see happen in real life. So the game is the vehicle to imagine new futures and manifesting them, hopefully, in your own life as well beyond that. And so when I said I have it from Martha has it from Wade Davis, who is an anthropologist, and he talks about the wayfinder. So the idea of authenticity is all about how we find our own way. And the wayfinders, the Polynesian wayfinders, they had these tiny, tiny canoes and found these little islands that other people with technology completely overlooked. That magic is really spectacular and something to be inspired by. And they say you have to know exactly where you came from to know where you're going. So it's the self-exploration that is really important, this awareness for yourself in the context of your environment. And this is just a really inspiring image to me, that the navigators in these little canoes, they did not sleep, and they not at all throughout the entire travel, and they remained monk-like, and they were undisturbed. I mean, that alone is magical. I wish it could be that. And they were just completely tuned into every single wave crashing on the hull of the canoe, every single bird they saw somewhere, if there were birds and they were close to an island already, every natural occurrence around them, they were one with it, they were part with it. And they could hold the image of the island that they were trying to find in their mind, because they were so in unison with their lived experience, with their presence. And what they managed to do through this really looks like a feat of magic. But that is the key to that, is this total stillness, centeredness, alignment, and oneness. So we hope to somehow instill this as an idea and awaken a longing for it with the witch's way. And one of the potent imagery, I hope, that is in there is the dog.
Yeah. So when you encounter the dog, who is named Dog in the story, it's one of the first times that Lou really feels scared and threatened in the forest. But it's also this really interesting juxtaposition, because almost right away you understand the dog as being old and tired in addition to momentarily threatening. And so there's a reflective piece in there that really brings out sort of that idea of midlife, that idea of sort of feeling askew in all of it. And when I tried to illustrate that, as Doris mentioned earlier, I'm sort of fascinated by what we know, what we don't know, what we think we know, and probably got wrong about druids and the notion of them and magic. And again, it was not a supernatural form of magic. It was a very sort of almost ultra natural form of magic, right? It was being in one with nature. It was being one with the land, one with the forest, and trying to understand, plants and animals and all of those things. And so the dog is a little wolf-like, a little less domesticated than we're used to, but to try to really get at sort of that raw animalism that's inherent in some of those thoughts and some of those thoughts and beliefs from that period.
Thank you, Andy. And the way to communicate the dog is actually wordless. The dog just conjures images in your mind, and you suddenly have this unity with this creature, and it's your inner creature. It's your inner puppy that has become an old beaten down dog. And you have to follow it back to your joy. It is the guardian of your mind's island, really, where you need to go to unlock this creative flow that you have. And you realize that you find yourself in a dungeon, that you created a dungeon around yourself with all of your beliefs and things that you thought you had to do, even though they really didn't correspond with who you were. So the imagination of the dungeon walls are an illusion. You created them yourselves with your mind, which also means you can transcend them yourself with your mind, with your imagination, and you can liberate yourself from this prison that you put yourself into. In the story, you quite literally are in the bottom of a dungeon, and you have to get out of that somehow. That's one of the really important pieces of this the first part of this transformational journey in Spring. And you have to read it to know how this ends. I'm not going to spoil that. But there is a bigger picture to this, and I'm touching on this very, very briefly because I know we're running out of time. When we talk about games and magic and how this contributes to a meaningful life, there is a transformation at stake that goes way beyond the individual perspective. And this idea of oneness is very strongly connected to the philosophy behind any kind of sustainability effort. It's a non-dualism approach to the world. It's not us and them. It's not me and the environment. It's all part of a big system. So if we can make games that help us understand that we are all connected, that there is this magic of alignment and authenticity and integrity and oneness, then we can apply this to other areas. Hopefully it fosters a thinking that is bigger than the individual happiness or well-being. It's a well-being of the world that is at stake here. It's a transformation, a systems change that is at stake here. And it is based not just on flights of fancy and myth and all of that. It is really based on neuroscience. So when we talk about consciousness, and one person I've been really, really inspired by was Ken Wilber, who talks about the spectrum of consciousness and all the meditation studies that have been done in bringing Eastern and Western philosophy together. There is magic in this experience of true, pure consciousness beyond thinking thought. And a more accessible approach to this might be Jill Bolte Taylor's recent work. Now, she gave this very well-known TED Talk on her stroke of insight. So she's a neuroanatomist. She had a stroke, And she talked about what happened when her entire left side of the brain went offline. And with it, very important pieces of her personality. And what she was left with were actually the two characters in her brain. I used the wrong one, no. On the right side of her brain. So she's dividing the brain into 4 characters that are very distinct and all need to work together for this kind of whole brain living. And she's talking about the persona, the thinking conscious self, the shadow self. These are, by the way, this maps onto the 4 Jungian archetypes. And then on the right side, it's the feeling unconscious self, the anima or animus that is very playful and in the moment. And super importantly for the idea of magic is character 4, the true self, which is loving and encompassing and doesn't judge or distinguish between us and others, really. If you only have that, you're not a functional human being, but you're super blissful, according to her. So when we think about designing games that can tap into magic, that bring us into alignment and that foster a sense of connectedness to everything in oneness and unity, then we can draw inspiration from neuroscience. We can find this kind of personal meaning and bliss through inner alignment. We can harness myth and metaphor to do this. We can tap into these technologies of magic, as I have described, and then we really should invest a bit more time into thinking about how we can design games that help us quiet the analytical self, the problem-solving self, and let character 4, this connected oneness self, light up and fill us up. So this is where you find the witch's way. And we have 5 minutes, I think, for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your wonderful talk. It was really, really interesting and good to